Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Man from the Sea. It began, like so many of our escapades, with a newspaper article, an envelope marked private, a raised eyebrow from Poirot, and a slight twinkle in his eye that told me my quiet plans for the week had been completed. Within 24 hours we were on a train to Hampshire, destined for Greystone Hall, and involved in one of the oddest cases we had ever seen. Stranger still, it started with a resurrection. It was a dreary, dismal April morning, and I had just settled into breakfast, kippers and a cup of strong tea, when Poirot, deep behind his copy of the Times, exclaimed softly, "Tiens, Hastings, look at this, a rather strange mystery." He turned the paper to face me, one exquisite finger tapping a headline halfway down the page. "The missing heir has returned to Tichborne Hall. A man claiming to be a baronet disappeared at sea 30 years ago. Alarms relatives and local officials." A photograph of a square-faced man in a poorly cut suit, standing in front of a massive ivy-strangled old mansion, appeared underneath the headline. He was built like a labourer, with broad shoulders and a rebellious chin tilt. I read loudly, "Sir Roger Tichborne, assumed dead in the wreckage of the Alberta in 1892, has returned alive and unannounced. The man, now known as James Tarrant, claims to have suffered memory loss after the accident and spent decades surviving in the Australian outback before a chance discovery revealed his identity. The Tichborne estate, which had long been passed down to his younger brother, may now face a court challenge." "That's a new one," I remarked, folding the page. Poirot whispered, "No, not new. The eyes are light but elegant. You see the potential, Hastings. A man returns after 30 years. He professes to be who he once was. Some believe him, others do not. It's a question of identification and truth. But how can it be proven after so long?" Poirot tapped his temples. "There are always specifics, such as a scar, a word spoken as a child, or the exact way a man ties his cravat. Like these, they don't lie." Just then there was a knock on the door. Miss Lemon entered with her usual efficiency and deposited one packet on the breakfast table. She claimed to be a special messenger from Hampshire. Poirot arched an eyebrow, opened the envelope, and read the letter inside. His expression became contemplative. "It is from Lady Frances Tichborne herself," he stated. "The mother. She wrote to you. May we? She has read about me. She claims there are things this man recalls that no impostor could know. He also forgets things that her son would never do. She begs me to come to Tichborne Hall and tell her whether her son has genuinely returned or if she is being duped." I uttered a low whistle. "That's more serious than I expected." Poirot folded the letter carefully. "We travel from Hastings to Hampshire. There is a ghost strolling around Tichborne Hall, and I plan to find out whether he is made of flesh and blood or smoke and falsehoods." I had a mix of interest and uneasiness. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that you're taking the case, but it still sounds unusual even for you." Poirot offered a slight smile. "Hastings, the usual bears no appeal for my intellect. But a mystery like this, the question of identity, the shadows of the past, the hopes and anxieties of a family ripped apart by doubt, is exactly the type of conundrum I thrive on." "Do you think this man is who he says he is?" I asked. Poirot paused and looked at me with his sharp, intelligent eyes. "I believe that only by seeing with my own eyes and asking questions in my own voice would I be able to understand Hastings. Until then, all is uncertain." I couldn't help but feel that this was going to be a case unlike any other, one that would put Poirot's famous skills to the ultimate test. The dawn light was faint and tentative when we caught the early train to Hampshire. The city fog clung stubbornly to the station's borders, but as the train rolled away from London, the mist cleared, revealing the patchwork of fields and hedgerows beneath the blue sky. Poirot sat opposite me, his gaze fixed on the window, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. For once he was silent for a while, which I regarded as an invitation to interrupt the silence. I ventured into the Tichborne family. What do we truly know about them, except the articles and Lady Frances's letter? Poirot folds his hands carefully. "Hastings is a family that takes pride in its genealogy and titles. The Tichbornes have long been rooted in Hampshire soil, and their name is intertwined with the county's history. But pride can be a two-edged sword. It sharpens both loyalty and distrust. I nodded. Lady Frances strikes me as a woman who clings desperately to hope. To believe that her kid had returned after 30 years apart. It must be both a relief and a torment. Indeed, the heart's aspirations frequently conflict with reason. Lady Frances's conviction has weight, but it is not proof. I studied Poirot's attentive expression, and Sir George, the younger brother, has everything to lose. Ah yes, the man who currently owns the estate. Such a position fosters motivation, but also anxiety. Is his objection to the assertion motivated by conviction, fear, or something darker? We will see. The carriage bounced gently as the train moved through the countryside. And the man himself, James Tarrant, or whomever he genuinely is. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. A man in between worlds. His claim is bold, yet even boldness can conceal desperation. The truth is concealed somewhere in the labyrinth of memory and time. I found myself gazing out at the fields, verdant and gleaming with spring's regeneration, and wondering what shadows lay beneath the surface of that historic family home. Poirot's voice interrupted my reverie. We will explore the world of the Tichbornes, where ghosts wander unseen and secrets await to be revealed. I raised my cup in a silent tribute to the little grey cells. Then he grinned at the little grey cells and justice. The train rushed on, bringing us closer to the mystery that lay beyond the sweeping hills. Chapter 2. Arrive at Tichborne Hall. The trip from London to Hampshire had been long but uneventful. However, as the train approached the small country station, the atmosphere intensified with expectancy. I had watched the fields transform from the clean geometries of suburban gardens to huge meadows speckled with sheep, their fleeces mottled grey and white against a rainy sky. The station was hardly more than a halt, with the platform almost unoccupied, except for a single footman waiting behind a black automobile. As we departed, the early April morning chill sliced into our faces, and I pulled my coat tighter over me. Poirot's keen eyes absorbed every detail. The station's aged wooden sign, the glitter of damp cobblestones and the tidy hedge beyond. He whispered, "The quiet heart of England." However, the deepest secrets are sometimes found in the most tranquil settings. We moved carefully down a narrow path flanked with gnarled trees, whose twisted branches appeared to stretch out like ancient fingers. The air smelled vaguely of damp dirt and sprouting leaves, the first breath of spring fighting against the lingering cold. Tichborne Hall appeared ahead, through a shifting mist, in a stately but faded fashion that seemed more like a relic of a bygone era than a vibrant family house. Its grey stone walls were ivy-covered, and the tall chimneys stood like quiet sentinels against the cloudy sky. "Magnificent," I murmured, with a hint of melancholy in my voice. "We only feel the weight of years, Hastings. The household's memory is as strong as stone." The carriage came to a halt in front of the massive oak doors, which were ornately carved with the family crest, a shield depicting 3 lions passant beneath the inscription "40 Secud at Prudentia." Before we could seek help, the massive doors swung wide to reveal a petite woman standing in the murky hall, surrounded by shadows but unmistakably commanding. "Mr. Poe and Mr. Hastings." She greeted us, her voice quiet yet firm. "Welcome to Tichborne Hall." Lady Frances Tichborne was small and bowed with age, her pale hands held tightly in front of her. Her silver hair was drawn back in a tight bun, and her eyes were filled with the same piercing intelligence I had seen in the letters, mixed with tiredness and something like optimism. "Madame," Poirot replied, bowing with his usual elegance, "it's an honor. Your letter described a deeply upsetting circumstance. I tell you that we will do everything possible to uncover the truth." She smiled softly, but the tightness in her shoulders betrayed her. "Thank you, Miss Poirot. I must admit that it is a relief to see a familiar face, especially one as alien as yours." I noticed the little quaver in her voice, and the way she looked into the hallway's shadows. From the darkness appeared a tall guy with a robust body, his clothes plainly cut and slightly tattered, as if he had lived a life far from the pleasures of a rural estate. His face was square-jawed, his eyes dark and probing. He carried himself with a serene elegance that disguised his rugged exterior. "This is the man," Lady Frances stated softly. "James Tarrant, or as he insists, Sir Roger Tichborne, returned from the sea and the wilderness." I closely observed him. There was something fascinating about the way he looked. Not just the man in the portrait, but a live presence imbued with an odd combination of defiance and vulnerability. "Sir," Poirot murmured, inclining his head. "I'm Mousse Hercule Poirot. We came at Lady Frances' request to find out the truth about your allegation." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know who I am. I've had the memory for years, in fragments at first, but enough to convince me." "I hope this is enough to convince you." Before I could respond, a new voice cut through the silence. A guy approached from the far end of the hall, towering and harsh, his features hard and set with dreadful power. "Sir George Tichborne is the youngest son. You invited strangers into my home without my permission." His voice was frigid and his eyes flashed with rage. "And you want me to accept this impostor as my brother?" Lady Frances's hands trembled. "George, please." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm yet firm. "I understand your worry, Mr. Tichborne, but this is a situation that requires patience and reason, not hasty judgment." Sir George's gaze shifted to the man in the middle of the storm. "Reason. What may be the purpose for this individual, threatening to remove what is rightfully mine? The estate, the title, and everything my birth has earned." "Your birthright does not guarantee the truth," Poirot responded quietly. "We must seek the facts, regardless of how inconvenient they may be." The air became tense, as the three guys stood like opposing forces locked in an unbreakable orbit. Lady Frances stepped between them. "Enough. Let us sit down and discuss this rationally. Monsieur Poirot, you'll need to hear everything, both from my son and those who question him." The mansion seemed to exhale with a shudder, the creak of ancient timbers, and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock signaling the passage of a family's long-held secrets. As we followed Lady Frances into the drawing room, I looked back at James Tarrant. His visage was marked with agony, a desire to be believed and restore a life lost to time. The drawing room was a large room filled with bookcases. Their spines had faded after decades of exposure to sunshine and dust. Heavy curtains stayed drawn against the frost outside, muffled the pale morning light into a soft glow. The furnishings hinted of earlier grandeur, with carved oak chairs with aged upholstery, a grand piano hidden behind a dust cloth, and a faded Persian rug stretching over the creaky flooring. Lady Frances gestured to a group of seats situated near the hearth. "Please sit," she insisted, arranging herself with weary dignity. Sir George stood by the window, his gaze riveted on the grounds beyond, as if looking for a lost truth. James Tarrant sat aside, his posture tight but defiant, his gaze shifting between us all. Poole cleared his throat and started with soft formality. "Madame MZ, please express your perspectives. Tell me in your own words about this man's return." Lady Frances spoke first, her voice full of hope and grief. When he arrived, it was as if a ghost had passed through the door. He remembered fragments, little intimate information that no outsider could understand. My youngster adored the nursery songs and the way he folded his letters. Yet other things escaped him. Events and names should have been as familiar as breathing. Sir George's expression clouded. "Madame, intimate details are learnable, but if this man is genuinely my brother, why does he fail the most basic tests? He is unable to name our estate's tenants or recollect the customs that have been passed down through centuries." James' voice was quiet but steady. "The sea took more than my memories. The remainder of the time spent in the bush was fuzzy, but the heart remembers." Poirot's fingers tightened beneath his chin. "Memory, Mesame, is a delicate tapestry, tattered and worn but never completely lost. Trauma can cause the threads to unravel." Sir George's lips twisted. "However, this tapestry is incomplete and inconsistent. How can we put our trust in a patchwork?" Lady Frances's voice broke with deep fury. "Because this is all we have." Hope and a tiny whisper of sunlight returned. The room became heavier with contradictory feelings, anguish clashing with distrust, hope versus despair. The strain was palpable, like a taut wire about to snap. "There is more beneath this than mere lost memory, isn't there?" I said as I leaned toward Poirot. He nodded, his gaze tightening. "We're Hastings. Secrets are buried here. Secrets are waiting to be revealed." As the afternoon sun set, the family came closer, engrossed in the growing drama of identity, loss, and the fraying strands of a family's claim to reality. Chapter 3, Truth in Fragments. Following the tense gathering in the drawing room, Poirot proposed we start with a private chat with James Tarrant personally. We were shown to the old library after lunch. Although a fire had been set, the air remained wet, and the subtle fragrance of ancient leather and pipe smoke lingered in the towering ceiling chamber. The shelves extended to the molded cornices, brimming with generations of serious bindings, law, natural history, and family documents. Even before the man appeared, Poirot sat in an armchair by the fireplace and observed the scene, hoping for clues. James Tarrant arrived without hesitancy, his demeanor modest yet determined. He wore the same well-worn suit I had seen him wear the day before, plain wool, slightly loose at the shoulders, as if formerly made for a larger frame. He had shaved, but his skin had the sun-worn roughness of a guy accustomed to harsher climes. Poirot motioned to the chair opposite. "Please, Missy, sit. I'd like to start by hearing your narrative from your own lips, in your own time." If Roger was who he claimed to be, he nodded, folded his enormous hands, and placed his eyes on a point just above the mantel, rather than on us. "I believe it started in the summer of 1992, he remarked. "I was 19, the heir to a name I didn't completely understand and daring enough to prove it." He gave a weak, bitter smile. "There was a girl, Mary Dennison, who was a tenant's daughter but had already worked in the kitchens. We were young and dumb. It resulted in letters, rumors, promises, and scandals that would not have received a mention in the Times if I had been the younger son, but I was not." Poirot said nothing but nodded slowly. "My father was enraged, and I believe my mother was upset. They arranged for me to be sent abroad, supposedly to manage a cattle operation in Victoria, and unofficially to be forgotten until the situation calmed down. I was scheduled to sail aboard the Alberta for Cape Town, and then Fremantle." "And the ship?" I inquired, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. He looked at me and caught fire in the Indian Ocean. I recall waking up to yells of flames on the water. I got it onto a lifeboat. Perhaps I was sucked into one. I can't remember. I awoke on the beach in Queensland. A pearling crew had found me floating in and out of consciousness. "You had lost your memory?" Poirot asked. "Everything?" He responded. "For months I couldn't remember anything. No name, no home, not even that I am from England. They called me Jim. It stuck. "And you stayed in Australia?" He nodded. "I worked wherever I could. Cattle shearing is a bit of gold work in Kalgoorlie. I was good with numbers." I eventually began referring to myself as James Tarrant, either half recalled or wholly fabricated. After a while I began to identify as Australian. It was easier than asking questions. When did my memories return? Pooh leant forward slightly. "Fragments," James explained. "Initially there were only images. A stairway with a crimson runner, a lake with a small boathouse, and the sound of someone calling Roger. I assumed they were dreams. Then one day I came upon the name Tichborne in an old British newspaper. It struck me like lightning." He paused and frowned. "That was 10 years ago. It took me years to trace the inheritance, to ensure I wasn't going insane. When I landed in England, I maintained my distance. I strolled past the house's gates a dozen times before I ventured to write." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Lady Frances accepted you." He explained that she wasn't sure what to think at first. I told her what I remembered. Childhood phrases, including the name of the nurse who treated me when I had scarlet fever. I mentioned the silver box that father kept his smokes in. Certain details were correct, while others were incorrect. His shoulders heaved tiredly. "But 30 years is a long time. I cannot pretend to remember everything. Sometimes I believe I just remember the act of remembering." I caught Pooh's eye. His face revealed nothing, but I had seen that expression before. The expression of a guy turning over parts of a jigsaw puzzle, knowing some do not yet fit. "You do not resent the doubts?" Poirot asked gently. James looked away. "How could I? I returned from the dead, Miss Poirot, and expected the world to greet me. That was my error, but I understand who I am. And what do you want?" I asked. He responded without hesitation. "The truth, no matter the cost. If I am Roger Tichborne, I want my name restored. If not, I'd like to know who I am." Pooh offered a modest, somber nod. "Mercoteron. That's all for now." James stood. As he turned to leave, he paused near the door. "She believes me, you know," he explained, referring to Lady Frances. "Even when she pretended not to. Her mother knows." Then he was gone. When Lady Frances entered the library, she did not immediately sit down. Instead, she went straight to the window and remained there for a long time, her back to us, gazing out across the garden terrace where the first shoots of wisteria curved hopefully toward the light. "I never thought I would live to see him again," she finally remarked sadly. "Not truly." Poirot rose as she turned and gently gestured to the seat James had left vacant. "Please, madam, it is better we speak in comfort." She nodded and took cautious, precise steps across the room, despite her age-related stiffness. Once seated, she clasped her gloved hands in her lap and glanced down at them, as if weighing her next words against the weight of time. "I'm not sure what I believe," she added, not looking at either of us. "Or, more accurately, I know too much to fully believe anyone's word." "You've seen the claimant closely," Poirot said. We spoke with him and gazed into his eyes. "Do you believe he is your son?" She closed her eyes. "Some days, yes." In his eyes I see a glimpse of Roger. His voice is harsher and slower, yet every now and then he says something, a turn of phrase, a rhythm of speech, and it's as if a door opens in my mind. "Nevertheless," I asked gently. She gazed up at me, her expression a mix of sadness and steel. "However, there are some missing and gaps. He recalls his governess, but forgets the name of Jupiter, our old Labrador who accompanied him everywhere. He recalls falling from an oak tree at the age of 9, but not the scar it left on his chin." She tapped her own to demonstrate. Poirot tilted his head. "Would you argue that the details he forgets are the ones a mother recalls best?" A tiny smile pulled at her lips, sorrowful and aware. "Yes, exactly. So you claimed in your letter that he knew things no outsider could have known." Poirot asked, "Will you tell me some of these?" He remembered how his father polished his spectacles before scolding the lads. He also detailed the layout of a secret chamber in Roger's old writing desk. Details, intimate ones. And yet, Poirot continued softly, these recollections could be obtained if one had access to home documents or the confidences of a close family member. She nodded. "It's not impossible, but who would go to such extremes for so long?" I could see fatigue and strife in her eyes. Whatever else she was, Lady Frances was not a fool. Her thinking stayed sharp under the cloak of sadness. "Tell me, madame," Poirot asked kindly but forcefully, "what did you truly feel? The first time you saw him?" She paused, and for a little period her poise faded. "I felt my heart stop," she said softly. "My Roger had a style of standing with one foot slightly turned inward. This man does the same thing without thinking. A child's gesture brought him into manhood without his knowledge. Can such a thing be faked?" Poirot said nothing. "I wanted it to be him," she said frantically. "Maybe I still do. But I've lived long enough to question both desire and memory. What if I'm seeing what I want to see? Is there anyone who could have aided his knowledge?" Poirot asked. "Letters, servants, or friends?" Her expression clouded. "I fear so. Our previous governess, Miss Pilling, has maintained contact with several former employees. There was also the question of Baxter, my late husband's valet. He departed in tough circumstances, disgruntled. It wouldn't surprise me if he harbored resentments or secrets." "And Sir George?" Poirot asked cautiously. Lady Frances released a long sigh. "George has never forgiven me for grieving Roger so terribly. He was always the cooler of the two, but this job has hardened him even more. I'm not sure if he doubts the man out of rationality or fear of losing what he believes is rightfully his." Poirot rose and offered her a hand as she stood. "Madam, you have helped more than you realize." She nodded again and looked out the window. "Mupro, if he isn't my son, please inform me gently. And if he is, may God help this house." We left her there, half lost in the misty light, her silhouette framed by curtains and dust, the weight of memory weighing down like stone lintel above the fireplace. Sir George did not wait to be summoned. He entered the library precisely 10 minutes after his mother had left, marching in with the confident, clipped step of a man used to commanding. His tall body created a sharp silhouette against the room's rich wood paneling, and he held a riding whip under his arm. "I believe it is intended as a statement of control, rather than for actual use." He refuses to sit. "If it's the same to you, Poirot, I'd rather keep this brief," he said. "I don't believe in wasting time, especially with fantasy." Poe tilted his head. "Of course, monsieur, we will not keep you longer than is required, but you understand. We must hear all sides." George let out a short, unfunny laugh. "Sides? There are only two, truth and falsehood." The pause was thick, with the muffled ticking of the library clock. Poe spoke gently. "However, Lady Frances remains hopeful. She concurs. This man recalls intimate details, things only a family member would know. George's jaws constricted. Hope has previously blinded my mother. She wants to believe not only for herself, but also to get rid of the guilt she's been carrying about for so long. But memory is too readily influenced. Monsieur, the man's knowledge is incomplete or overly convenient. I examined him as he moved to stand behind the fireplace. His features, while more sharply defined than James's, had a familial resemblance, with the same angular brow and deep-set green eyes. Where James had conveyed a sense of calm desperation, George was all precision and fury, as if feeling were a struggle to be fought and won. "Tell me, Missy," Pooh started, "what makes you believe this man is not your brother?" George's response was fast and almost prepared. He remembers the name of my father's nurse, and can recall the old billiard room, yes, but he couldn't recollect his father's pet name for him, or the rhyme we made up as youngsters that only Roger and I shared. He does not recall the story of George, the black sheep ram after whom I was called as part of a family tradition, and he is left-handed, whereas Roger was not. My brother fenced with his left hand, but wrote with his right. This man signs on the left. Poirot nodded while taking mental notes. I, ever vigilant, intervened. However, pain, years abroad, and memory can all skew reality. Can they not? George's mouth twisted slightly. A life can be created out of crumbs and gossip. Is it difficult to picture someone doing the same? Poirot lifted an eyebrow. And the reason the estate, the title, the weight of a name passed down through generations. Do you believe a man who has lived as a nomad would not be lured by the prospect of an English fortune? The silence extended. Poirot looked at him intently, and if you are mistaken, Poirot's voice was calm but deliberate. Can you conceive if this man is your brother, despite your convictions? For the first time, a flicker of hesitancy, possibly pain, passed George's features, but it fled as quickly as it appeared. I can't afford to imagine it, he added quietly. I've borne this family for decades, Miss Poirot. I do what must be done, that's all. Pooh lowered his head in respect. Please, Mr. Tichborne, your contribution will help our investigation. Without another word, Sir George turned on his heel and strode out of the library, his footsteps crisp on the age-worn floor. I exhaled when the door snapped shut. I have no doubts about him, Poirot. Poirot's gaze lingered on the locked door. No, Hastings, however, sometimes confidence rather than doubt leads us wrong. The library was colder without George, a room haunted by as many mysteries as the volumes on its shelves. Chapter 4. A Study of Contradictions. The next morning, we found ourselves in the breakfast room, a less formal chamber that overlooked a little walled garden where dew hung to the rose bushes like a coat of silver. The stress from the previous day hadn't subsided. It hung in the air, thick and cloying like the aroma of old potpourri. Well, Poirot, I responded, applying marmalade to my toast with more vigor than was entirely required. What a trio! A mother who wants to believe, a brother who rejects, and a claim that appears to be both authentic and fraudulent all at once. My head is spinning. Poirot, who was carefully arranging segments of a peeling orange on his plate, did not look up. You're looking at the picture, Hastings, not the threads. The stories contradict us, as one would expect. But the lies, my friend, have to be consistent. That is where we will discover the truth. He arranged a final orange segment into a flawless star pattern and looked at me, his eyes full of intent. Today we will pull on two threads. To begin, consider the distant past. Second, the past is very close. I've already sent a telegraph to our good friend Inspector at Scotland Yard, I exclaimed. You've brought him into it. His reach is long, Poirot stated simply. I've asked him to look into the Australian authorities, the Alberta's passenger list, any records of survivors discovered on the Queensland coast in 1892, and most significantly, any indication of a guy named James Tarrant working in the goldfields of Kalgoorlie or on cattle ranches. A man who claims to be skilled with statistics may have left a trail. He swept a crumb off the tablecloth. And as we wait for the long thread to be pulled from across the world, we'll look at the one right here. Lady Frances named two former staff members, a governess, Miss Pilling, and a valet, Baxter. I remembered the bitter valet. She seemed to suspect he had a grudge. Precisely, a grudge is an effective motivator. It can indeed inspire vengeance, but it can also feed a yearning for a very specific type of justice. We will begin with him. Pooh summoned the butler, an elderly man named Jennings who had served the family for 40 years. "Miss Pilling, sir," Jennings remarked in a low monotone, "retired to Cheltenham several years ago. Lady Frances communicates with her around Christmas." He gave the address without fuss. "Mr. Baxter resides in the village. Rose Cottage is ranked 3rd. He was my predecessor as a valet before serving the old master." Poirot inquired gently as to why he had departed under such tough circumstances. The butler's face showed a flicker of emotion, possibly disgust. Following his father's death, Sir George decided to discharge him. "Mr. Baxter had his own way of doing things, sir, and it did not suit the new master." The connotation was plain. Baxter had been faithful to the previous leadership, not the new. Rose Cottage was a modest stone home with a thatched roof and a weed-infested garden. The man who answered the door stooped and wheezed, his face covered in ugly red veins. His eyes, when they focused on us, were piercing and distrustful. This was Alfred Baxter. "We are here on behalf of Lady Frances," Poirot said, his tone disarmingly friendly. "We are looking into the matter of Sir Roger's return." Baxter let out a rough, barking chuckle. "Sir Roger? Do you mean the Australian fellow? Come inside. I have nothing better to do than chat about ghosts." He took us into a messy room that smelled like stale tobacco and damp wool. He did not offer us a seat, but instead slumped into a huge, tattered armchair. "You served the late Sir Reginald for many years." Poirot remained unfazed. "You must have known the young Master Roger well." Baxter rasped. "Knew him both. Roger was the lively one, constantly getting into trouble. George was the cold fish, constantly watching and calculating." I intervened, saying that Sir George feels this claimant is a fake. He added that his sibling is right-handed, but this man is not. Baxter snorted. Roger wrote with his right hand, yet the youngster was intelligent. He attempted to teach himself to use his left for everything else. He claimed it would make his thinking sharper. Fencing, sketching, and even trying to hit a cricket ball left-handed. Angered his father. Poirot's eyes glittered. Interessant. Sir George failed to mention this detail. Baxter murmured, "George only mentions what suits him. He couldn't wait to be the lord of this house, and fired me within a month of the old man's funeral, claiming I was too set in my ways. The truth is that I knew too much about his small economies. He would sell off a piece of timber from the estate without leaving a record. You have no feelings for Sir George." "That is evident," Poirot observed. "Would you like to see him lose the estate to a returned brother?" Baxter's stare was cunning. "I'd be happy to see justice done. If the man is Sir Roger, he deserves what he has." "And have you spoken with this man?" Poirot's voice was silky, and he may have offered him some assistance or a few recollections to stimulate his own. The old valet's eyes narrowed. "I haven't spoken to anyone. I keep to myself. However, a man with a grudge can hear things. The staff in the hall are still talking. They claim that the Australian knows things that only family members know." Poirot said softly, "What was the real reason he was sent away?" "The name of the girl in the kitchens is Mary Dennison." Baxter froze for a split second, his grasp tightening on his chair's armrest. "I'm not sure about that," he said a little too fast. "Won't you?" Poop pressed. "It was the major scandal of the summer. The reason Sir Reginald dispatched his heir to the other side of the earth. A valet as devoted to the family as you claim to be would have known about it." The old man's expression was one of bitterness. He looked from Poirot to me and spat into the icy hearth. "You can see yourself out. I've spoken my piece." As we returned along the muddy lane toward the hall, I felt a sense of accomplishment. "He's concealing something, Poirot. I'd wager he's been coaching the claim all along." He almost acknowledged it. Poe, on the other hand, was thoughtful, tapping his chin with a gloved finger. "Perhaps Hastings. But what he said isn't what intrigues me the most." He pretended he didn't recognize the name. "Mary Dennison?" I inquired, recalling the name from Terran's personal story. "We Hastings, Mary Dennis, are the very reason for Sir Roger's expedition. A valet as faithful as Baxter claimed to have been would have known the most important secret of his young master's life. But he denies it. Meanwhile, James Tarrant, the man Baxter is purportedly helping, informed us her name without prompting." He halted with a sparkle in his eye. "It's strange, isn't it, for a man tutored by a resentful valet to expose a secret that the valet claims not to know? Hastings's threads do not align." Chapter 5. The Cheltenham Witness. Several days after our visit to the unhappy Mr. Baxter, a telegram arrived at Teachbourne Hall. Jennings, the butler, brought it in on a silver salver, his expression as impenetrable as before. Poirot opened it with a flip of his fruit knife and read quietly, the corner of his mouth twitching up. "Ah," he muttered. "Our good inspector is ever the soul of efficiency. News from Australia?" I inquired enthusiastically. "Just so." He placed the message flat on the table between us. "Poirot, Tichborne Hall in Hampshire. Stop any inquiries with Queensland authorities. Stop wreck of Alberta. Confirmed 1892. Stop. Survivor. List incomplete. Stop. There is no record of James Tarrant in the gold. Fields or cattle ranches. Stop 1 James. Tarrant sailed from Melbourne to London. 1921. Matches the description. Stop. The identity has not been established. Stop." I frowned. So Tarrant lied about working in Kalgoorlie, but someone with that name had sailed to England. We have a lie sitting next to a truth, like mismatched bookends. He admitted to using a fake identity, but not the complete character. It suggests a man combining inventiveness and expertise. The question is whether he created his own identity or had it created for him. He taps the telegram attentively. This James Tarrant could have sprung from nowhere or someone else's memories, but we must return to our English thread. Hastings, the governess, Miss Pilling, and Lady Frances, his former confidant. More than that, a governess bears witness to the formative years, to habits that no impostor could readily replicate. She could hold the key to the mystery. Miss Pilling's house in Cheltenham was tidy, symmetrical and meticulously kept, much like the woman. She greeted us with precise courtesy and led us into a parlour adorned with lace antimacassars and the aroma of lavender. Her stance was upright, her demeanour efficient, and her gaze beneath gold-rimmed spectacles shrewd. "Lady Frances wrote to inform me of your arrival," she explained while pouring tea into porcelain cups. "It's quite the turn of events. After all these years, I must admit that I have no idea what to think." Poirot remarked kindly, "We are not looking for opinions, mademoiselle. Only memory. You were the governor of both boys." She claimed that George was always autonomous, particularly with regard to Roger. He loved the company of adults since a young age. Roger, her expression softened. He was bright, inventive, and mischievous, but never unkind. He liked adventure stories, notably Treasure Island and puzzles. He would place traps in the nursery simply to see if I could find them. Clever if frustrating. Poirot sipped his drink and studied. When he could be bothered, he was quick with figures, solved issues mentally, and refused to write down his processes. His tutor despised him, but he undoubtedly possessed the spark. Poirot laid down his cup lightly, and with which hand did he write? Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "He's correct, of course. Only on the right?" Pooh inquired calmly. There was a pause. "Well, now that you mention it," she replied, tilting her head. "There was a phase. He must have been around 14 when he insisted on training his left hand for writing, sketching, and even eating. They claimed it was to balance the brain. It infuriated Sir Reginald to no end, but Roger refused to be deterred. Poirot cocked his head, filing that away. There are also bodily marks. Do you remember if he had any scars? Perhaps on his chin? Certainly. When he was 9 years old, he fell from the large oak tree beside the lake. He tore open his left knee. I've had a scar there ever since. He was quite proud of it. Regarding his face, I don't recall anything on the chin. I was always quite careful about such things. I looked at Poirot. Lady Frances recalled a scar on her chin. This was the second obvious contradiction. Poirot's tone shifted slightly. We understand there was an incident with Mary Dennison, a kitchen maid. Miss Pilling's lips thinned. Yes, Roger became entangled. He was impetuous, always motivated by emotion. It was not intentional, but simply foolish. I guess he thought she'd been wronged. I informed Lady Frances that dismissing the girl so quickly was terrible, but it was not my place to intervene. She paused. Roger mourned intensely in his own way. Poirot stood and gave a tiny, appreciative bow. Your recall is admirable, mademoiselle. Few eyewitness recall events with such clarity and objectivity. We left shortly after and returned to the car. The fence slid past in green blurs, but Poirot remained contemplative, one gloved finger stroking his chin. Well, I inquired, what do you make of it? He did not respond at once. Next, we have a man who recalls being quick with numbers. Confirmed. He recalls a specific fall from a tree. Also confirmed. These are not things you read in society columns, Hastings. These are private habits. But the scar is exactly so. Lady Frances remembers one on the chin. Miss Pilling recalls only one on the knee. An elderly governess would care such wounds. Perhaps the mother remembers just what lingers in her imagination. I frowned. So does it benefit us? Poirot turned to me, his eyes sparkling. It tells us this. The claimant's information is not just detailed, but selectively detailed. Some realities, some absences, and some educated guesses. It's a patchwork. Either he is Roger, or he was tutored by someone who knows Roger better than anyone. Then who? He smiled with mischief. Mon ami is the next thread to follow. Chapter 6. The thread has been made whole. The late afternoon light, mellow and covered by rain, provided the vast drawing room a serene atmosphere as we assembled once more at Poirot's request. The fire had burned down. The walls appeared to lean closer, listening. Lady Frances, palms carefully folded to disguise her tremble, focused her gaze on the coins atop the mantelpiece. Sir George stood rigidly at the window. The fire of rebellion in his eye was now dulled by days of stress, and James Tarrant Roger waited with the unself-conscious composure of a man who has learned there is nothing more to confess. Neat and composed came forward, every gesture intentional, as though arranging his pieces on a chessboard for the last move, allowed us to bring together what is known and what can only be felt. His voice, low and clear, broke through the silence. You have all spoken truthfully, but memory is not a court, and hearts are rarely persuaded by logic alone. Still, the small grey cells seek order. He turned to face Lady Frances. Madam, you mentioned that your kid had a scar on his chin from a fall when he was 10. Miss Pilling, your son's governess, remembers only one cut on the face on the left knee, which she dressed herself after an accident when she was 9. Poirot gently pointed toward James. Monsieur, if you please. Without hesitation, James pulled aside his trouser to see the thin, pale mark on his left kneecap. Sir George's eyes squinted as if he were questioning the facts, even though he understood it. Poirot proceeded. Miss Pilling also recalled that when she was 14, Roger insisted on training his left hand for writing, sketching, and even fencing. Lady Frances, you remember your son's right-handedness, but perhaps it is old customs that remain with mothers. But both Baxter, the valet, and Miss Pilling acknowledged the boy's experiment was genuine, however frustrating to Sir Reginald. He allowed a moment of silence, the significance of these shared experiences hanging in the air. He admitted that such data, such as writing habits and the presence of an old scar, could be learnt, but they are not printed in society pages or easily obtained from servants. They are only seen by people at the centre of a household. Lady Frances raised a palm to her lips, and even George trembled, his confidence fading. Poirot then presented his final card. When you first arrived, Monsieur Tarrant, you named the kitchen girl Mary Dennison and exposed the root of the ancient family's sadness. However, Baxter, the sole servant with reason to question you, denied that such a name had ever been mentioned in this house. Is it possible? I wonder that a man coached in private would divulge such an intimate, unwelcome and unguided scandal. He turned to Lady Frances. Your own letter stated that no one outside the family knew the truth about that miserable summer. Have you ever confided in a servant? Lady Frances shook her head silently. Poirot's eyes softened. Thus I present this. A man may fabricate a name or guess a scar, but the manner of standing, with one foot turned, as the mother recalls, the unexpected unstudied gesture, and the readiness to injure himself with an old humiliation are not his. These objects are not easily manufactured. The stillness was deep and solemn. Sir George finally broke it, his voice harsh. It's a patchwork, he added, and I heard a fracture in what used to be granite. But perhaps my memory is no less hazy. Poe drew me away as the family finally broke down in tears and laughter. See, Hastings, proof persuades the head, but only recognition heals the heart. When in doubt, it is often necessary to accept the tapestry, no matter how patched. As we drove away through the Hampshire dusk, the house behind us faded into shadow and memory. Poe, I ventured after several miles of stillness. Do you really believe? He did not respond immediately. Instead, he took something from his coat, a small folded page with creases. He gave it to me, Poirot remarked quietly. Following the drawing room, he was embraced by his family. I believe he wanted it read only if doubt remained. He handed it to me. The penmanship was crude but undeniably heartfelt. "Mother, do you remember that green kite? Which one I begged my father to buy? It got entangled in a tall oak on the west field. You promised we'd get it together, but that night the fever set in. I never flew kites again. That day stuck with me like a charm. I didn't return for an inheritance. I returned for that moment to see if you remembered it too. Roger." I read it again and felt a knot grow in my throat. I muttered, "I don't recall any mention of a kite." "No," Poirot replied, "nor did Baxter or Miss Pilling. It is not something a pretender would make up." He put the note back in his pocket. "With the same care that one would give a pressed flower. Non-Hastings stated that there is no definitive proof or sealed testament. But what is memory if not the soul's fingerprint? This was for her, not the court, and not even for me. And so it ended, not with certainty, but with something rarer, a private truth delivered freely, a thread held together by love rather than reasoning. Music. As the mists clear above Tichborne Hall, Hercule Poirot exposes the claimant's true identity through intimate recollections that no pretender could manufacture, revealing James Tarrant as the missing Sir Roger and reuniting a shattered family. The case of the vanished Viscount ends with truth triumphing over doubt, but memories of wasted years linger like forgotten scars. We hope this journey into identity's shadows has captivated you, dear listeners. Did you trust the heir's story from the start, or were you persuaded by the brothers' skepticism? Please share your ideas below. If the case of the lost Viscount has piqued your interest, please like and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for more suspenseful stories. Please support our craft by leaving a tip via Super Thanks or joining our membership link in the description.